Welcome to Marketing Automation Engagement Campaign Training. My name is Christina Davila, and I'm an implementation team lead at HireLogic. Quick note for you that Real Magnet is now part of the HireLogic family and powers the enterprise marketing automation platform. Some of the training goals that we're going to cover in this session are the specific steps to configure an engagement campaign, walk through exactly what the engagement rule options are, and strategy and tracking for this type of campaign. Some quick terms that I want you to become familiar with are: what is a listening campaign? A listening campaign is a campaign that doesn't specifically send any messages as part of it. So a welcome campaign is something where you might be sending a series of messages to your recipients, and that's what we're tracking against. But a listening campaign is using all of the existing activity in your account and the one-off messages that you're creating, and it's looking at all of that data for the metrics for your recipients. A listening campaign is one of the best ways to get started in an automation tool because you're using your existing marketing efforts and tracking against that. Engaged. An engaged recipient is someone who's actively interacting with your messages by either opening or clicking in a message. A disengaged recipient is someone who is not interacting with your messages, meaning they are not opening or clicking in any of your messages. Let's start under the Automation tab, and I'm just going to start titling my name of the campaign, and this can be anything that you'd like. This is just internal, so I'm just going to call this my Training Engagement Campaign. Hit go. You're going to get the drop down in terms of the different types of campaigns, and I'm going to select Engagement. On this type of campaign, there are two options. We have interaction from last number of messages sent and interaction based on date range. Today we're going to be covering the last number of messages sent. So I'm going to select this and come into the tool and see what the different configuration options are. There are simply two steps that I have to go through, and the first one is going to be about who are the campaign members, so who are we going to look at to analyze this data, and the second are the specific engagement rules, meaning how do we want to analyze the data for this campaign. Let's talk about the enrollment first and the campaign members. If you select the drop down, you can see the different options, and these can vary depending on your account settings. Listening campaigns are a unique set of campaigns in terms of the enrollment because we have the option of all recipients. All recipients is a really powerful tool because this allows you to not have to select all of the different groups of recipients that you have in your account, but you can target all of the recipients who you are actively sending messages to and see what they're doing and how they're interacting. This also helps you overall in terms of some of the strategy and how you might want to update your practices in terms of those who are engaged overall as well as those who are not. Very classic is recipients in a group. You might want to come in and create multiple different engagement campaigns for different segments. The easiest way to do that is with recipients in a group. And if you select this, you'll just select this group option. It'll give you the chart in terms of the group grid. You just select one or more groups that you'd like to associate, and that's all that you need to do there. There are specific options that you can choose to say you'd like to only use recipients who are in the group when the campaign starts to take a snapshot then. You could also look at recipients who are only added after the campaign starts. So if you had an older group that you don't want to really look at who was already in that group, but only people who are added nightly, you can definitely do that. And most people want to choose both to grab everybody who's in that group from the very beginning as well as those who are added. Other options are people who you are sending a message to. If you want to select those specific messages, then you can in terms of targeting them to see if they're really engaged or not. Using message categories. When you're creating your messages, you're categorizing them. Then you can look at that and say, I want to see across my event messages or my promotional messages, how are those performing in terms of engagement? And all of these other different options for different types of enrollment that really tie back to that overview session in terms of link labels, tags, and see how those can really become useful in other types of campaigns. We obviously also have the advanced enrollment option where you can configure many different things. So this is really like you're building your own query to say, I want to start with recipients who are in a group, but then I want to do another enrollment option. So for this one, let's start with a broad swath and say, let's do all recipients across the account. For the engagement rules, since we're talking about email messages, what we have to work with are opens or clicks. And so let's talk about both of these scenarios. And we get the question a lot, which is, I want to track both opens and clicks. You can definitely do that. The way you can do that is by configuring two separate campaigns. The enrollment would be the same, and you set up the first one for opens and you set up the second one for clicks. So let's talk about opens. This is a little bit more generous because industry-wide you're going to get a little bit more in terms of people opening a message. Click is going to be harder to get. You also want to look at the content of your messages to say, do you have enough links that people are actively clicking on? Are they prominent enough? So those are all things that you want to consider when you're looking at these types of configuration elements. The next thing you want to look at is, what is the strategy in terms of how many messages on average are you sending to your recipients up here in this campaign? And you want to use that to say, how many messages should I send if they don't open one of them? Should I term them to be disengaged? So let's, for this example, say if I send you 5 messages and you don't open any of them, I'm going to categorize you as disengaged. All right? And this can vary. A lot of times this factor you might not know. So this could be another variable that you would want to test. Again, the way you would test that is creating multiple versions of the same campaign with different variables here. So you could keep the same recipients, you could keep the same open, and then you just update this in terms of instead of 5, maybe you're starting with 10, etc. There's an optional feature here which I highly recommend. I usually do this after I set up a couple of these campaigns and I'm very clear in terms of the parameters and what data I want to look at. But we do have an optional feature here that says, do you want to add engaged or disengaged recipients to a group? If I say yes, then it's going to give you the option to tie them to groups. My recommendation for selecting the group is always add a new one for this specific campaign so that the results are very specific here. So I can say that this is my training engaged recipients. Now for the disengaged, I'm going to do the same thing. And that's as easy as it is. This feature has a lot of power to it. And so why this is important, you can always click on this to read more information. But why this is important is that this is basically a dynamic or automatic group. So if you don't have an integration with a database, an AMS, a CRM, this is a great way to have an automatic group that's going to be dynamic based on how your recipients are acting. So what happens is, somebody is going to be a part of this campaign, they're enrolled, and they're going to start receiving messages. These are the regular messages that you're sending to them through your regular marketing efforts. There's none specifically tied to this campaign. It's whatever those specific recipients are receiving. You're going to start sending them messages. If you have recipient 1 who is sent the first message, doesn't open, then the second message they do open, we're going to immediately put them in the back end into this training engaged recipients group. If you have another recipient who is receiving these messages and they receive the 5th message and don't open any of them, we're going to immediately put them in this disengaged group. How that's powerful is that we don't stop after those 5 messages. What happens is that we restart the counter and we start sending additional messages, but we know that we're starting another 5 count. So for that person who is disengaged, if they happen to open the 6th message, we're going to change them and move them from the disengaged group to the engaged group and vice versa. So this is really powerful for your marketing efforts because you can use these groups very strategically. So some examples are the disengaged recipients, especially when you're looking across your account. It's very popular and especially recommended by our deliverability team you might want to use this as a filter out group in other campaigns that you're setting up, as well as your regular manual messages that you're sending out. You're going to give those disengaged recipients a cooling off period, and then later on you're going to enroll them into a different campaign, such as a re-engagement campaign or a drip and nurture, trying to show them the best and the latest and greatest information that you think would be the most appropriate offerings for them, to see if you can get them excited about your information and engaged again. And your engaged recipients might be interested in one area or one silo of information, and maybe you want to cross promote and get some excitement on another level. So that's another option, to use your engaged recipients to see if you can interest them in other features, products, or other areas of interest. And the power here, again, is that people are ping-ponging back and forth, and so you will only be sending to the relevant people at the specific time of your messages. Very powerful feature. So we're done with step 1, which is setting up the campaign. Let's click the next button, and we're going to review the campaign. This page is really for the checks and balances internally. This is a good point to pause. You can even print the screen and talk internally with everyone to make sure that you're on the same page, to say what actually you want to cover in this campaign, and that all the variables are in agreement with your internal team. So this is just clearly telling me in plain text that I'm going to send to all the recipients in my database. I'm going to say that 5 messages are a part of the configuration, and if they open any of those last 5 messages, they're going to be engaged. And if they don't open any, they're going to be disengaged. And I am adding them into these 2 dynamic groups. Let's click the next button and go to the deploy campaign. When I'm here, this is going to give me a summary in terms of who's a part of this campaign. It's that enrollment option that we covered in the setup campaign. And then we get to schedule this. So I can either start this immediately on deployment and end it manually, or I can go ahead and select a start date and time, as well as a schedule end date. So for this one, let's just start it immediately on deployment and end it manually. I'm going to click this deploy button. It says, are you sure you want to deploy this? Yes, I do. This deployment is processing. It may take a couple of minutes, but that should not affect you staying on this page or leaving. You can definitely go off and set up some additional campaigns while you're waiting for that. You can see here it didn't take very long, and now that deployment is complete, and now I can check on the tracking information for this as well. So let's look at a sample campaign that's exactly what we set up, but it's more tracking purposes. So once you've configured this and you get some data, let's look at this. So here's a campaign that we're tracking for another engagement campaign. You're going to see the top row of information is going to have the start date, the campaign members. Please keep in mind this is always clickable, so you can see all of the recipients who are enrolled in this campaign. Also, a quick note is that if you are enrolled in a campaign, you will never be removed from a campaign, and we do that specifically for tracking purposes. How long it's been running and the current status. Next, on this specific campaign, we have some charts and graphs that I want to cover with you. The first one is this pie chart that says the state of the campaign, and we have 3 different stages that a recipient could be in. The first one is engaged, and engaged is going to be based off of that open or click that you configured in the campaign setup. So in our rule, we set up by open one of 5 messages, or any of 5 messages. These are the recipients who did that currently. Okay, so we can dive into here and we can see those specific recipients and who did that and the percentage wise. The disengaged, they've met that threshold of receiving those 5 messages and they currently are disengaged, meaning they did not open a message. If you would ever have some recipients who are still receiving those 5 messages, we're still evaluating them, so they currently are not engaged, but we're not going to put them in that disengaged bucket yet. And specifically, if you're using that dynamic group, we wouldn't want them in the disengaged because they don't meet the criteria that they are fully disengaged, meaning received 5 messages and didn't open. So if anybody's in progress, we're still evaluating them. And then below that, we have two other charts. The first one is engagement rate, where you can track this by date. We do have this little gear icon where you can filter by date, so you can hone in on different elements. And then we also have the ping-ponging back and forth of the disengagement and the re-engagement activity. So you can see that back and forth that's happening for this specific campaign. And if we come back up here, let's just delve into the more detail. So let's just look at one of these specific recipients. And how you can do that really simply is select that, highlight it with one click, and then if you click on the history button, that's going to take you to the specific recipients page. And this is specific for all of their automation data. And you can see that for this recipient, it's based off of email account, you can see that they are enrolled in 45 active campaigns. So again, keep that in mind in terms of strategically how many campaigns you'd like to have up and running. You can see here we've got multiple engagement campaigns running, and this recipient is engaged in many of them and not engaged in some, and that's exactly what's to be expected. So you might want to delve into some of these details and come in here to say, you know what, here are some of these specific campaigns, and let's just take a look at this one, and you can see that ping pong back and forth with the date and time in terms of what status they are currently in. So this is really good data for you to be able to just take a look at on a specific recipient level. I also want to just point out, keep in mind that back under the automation tab, I highly recommend coming into the reports and search. So my typical flow is create and configure my campaign, deploy it. Then I come back in, track the campaign, look at the different segments of recipients, look at the specific recipients in terms of their information, and you can even delve into more information at the very bottom in terms of other tags or just all of the raw data. All of the interactions that we have on that recipient could be quite lengthy. And then when you come back, like I said, you can go to this report search feature and you can build your own query based off of people who are in a campaign and have done other like elements to see if that's more anecdotal or more across the broad breadth of your account and the recipients in that campaign. So that's just another feature that I recommend that you use in conjunction with all of the other campaigns when you're setting them up. That concludes our session today on marketing automation engagement campaign training. Thank you so much for your attendance.